beautiful among thousands and thousands. YESHUA.
Welcome to another podcast of the supernatural through His Word. We go through verse by verse of the Bible and unpack the supernatural that is in the Bible. I am your host, Reverend Michael Norton. I am a missionary. I've been to Cambodia. I've been to Vietnam. I've been to Ethiopia. I've been to Haiti. I've been to South America. And all these contexts, I've actually had to work firsthand with some of the witchcraft that was being dealt with down there by local pastors. So I have a slightly different background and well-versed in dealing with the supernatural and seeing the supernatural in action. Again, I'd like to welcome you here today. I'm Reverend Michael Norton. I am a pastor of Remnant Church. And I also work as a Christian counselor and work with souls that are dealing with fractured and dealing with dissociative identity disorder. And I work with the full spectrum to the minor dissociations all the way down to people that have severe childhood abuse that resulted from ritual abuse as children, or all the way down to the spectrum between Satanism and Christianity, ritual abuse. Yes, both exist. So I put together this podcast a lot for the DID survivors, dissociative identity disorder, severe trauma survivors, because I know they have a twisted and fractured perspective of God's word, because captors or people or even parents used it for mind control to control their actions and their behaviors, and scripture was always twisted, and I usually use the word malign too. So as I'd worked with these people and worked with them through Remnant Church, and I worked with these souls through counseling, I discovered that their whole biblical foundation was so twisted, it was hard to go and do mends and repairs. The best thing to do was to go straight through, all the way through the Bible. I was talking to Jesus about this. God goes, I want you to do 66 books of the Bible, man. I go, okay. That's what you feel like we need to do. And present, because a lot of these broken people went through the ritual abuse, saw the dark supernatural. I want to present the good supernatural. Where scripture has been twisted, God's been presented as an evil person that just wipes out people, gets angry, hurts other people, and there's no rhyme or reason behind why he does what he did, or in fact that he even is a loving God. So being the missionary at the microphone, I said, hey, this is a good time to go through for anybody listening, whether you are whole and not fractured and you're just interested in learning more about the Holy Scripture, or you're somebody that has dissociative identity disorder and you want to put pieces back together properly from a safe source. That's why I put together the supernatural through His Word. Again, I worked as a Christian counselor. I worked on the streets as a homeless minister in the streets of San Francisco in some of the darkest neighborhoods on nights through the Friday night strikes that used to take place years ago. And I had accumulated a vast training through the Holy Spirit on the supernatural and the occult, which also led me down the road to write several books, A Field Guide to Spiritual Warfare, and The Field Guide to Advanced Spiritual Warfare, which now contains my work. I work with people on exorcism, people that truly were possessed. That's a whole different gambit or ballpark here. But through my experiences, and of course, being like for me from my other podcasts, the Tales of Glory, I am a recovering charismatic. I've been down the charismatic road, and I've also wound it back in where I'm radically in the middle, where I've seen the supernatural, and I just don't go off the rails here when I do see it, especially when you're dealing with spiritual warfare. You can't go off the rails there. So as I present this material, I've done a lot of research back to what the Hebrews believed. I'm going back to what the Second Temple Jews believed in their Bible, because we get a slightly different story, but more concise about what's going on, rather than having somebody with a PhD at a seminary try to piece it together and not have a firm understanding of what the Second Temple Jews believed. And we get that a lot in church. We get a lot of good stuff out of the Dallas Seminary, but a lot of stuff has been mended and ignored of what the actual Hebrews doing. I'm not knocking them. I did a lot of course studies there. Amazing seminary. But we go down this road where if we don't understand it, we fake it till we make it. And now with a lot of computational power going by and unpacking and analyzing the Dead Sea Scrolls and looking at the raw Hebrew, looking at the raw Greek, we're starting to see a story of what the people of the Second Temple Jews actually believe. By Second Temple, I mean Jesus. He was Second Temple. He's the Son of God. What did he preach? Paul. What was Peter talking about? I want to cover some of that stuff today because it gets pretty fascinating. So, again, I thank you for joining me through the supernatural through his word. And we got some exciting stuff today. We are diving into Genesis 6. Wow, what's that stuff, Mike? Right? What's going on here, Mike? We're going to unpack this. Very, very cool stuff going on. Let's fire up them PowerPoints, Mike. So again, if you're watching on my YouTube channel, I have the PowerPoints. If you're listening on Spotify or, Anchor FM or any of those podcasts, you probably won't see the podcast, but I'll go through them verse by verse. And excuse me, I'm going to do biblical there. I'll go through them slide by slide, not to make it boring, but I'll also inject my own knowledge and background too of things I've seen. So stuff's very mainstream. The stuff I'm presenting right now has been scholarly debated, has been gone through peer groups examinations. So this is stuff you'd see in a PhD level Hebrew class, okay, or a PhD level Greek class. So I'm not injecting anything weird or anything new or, hey, this is a new concept. This is not a new concept. This material has been around for a while. But the question mark on material has been, what do we do with it? So let's take a look at Genesis 6. Genesis 6, we're going to look at the Nephilim and Noah. So let's go through a brief introduction here. So I'm going through this background when I first encountered this story, right? The account of Noah's Ark and the flood is a Sunday school favorite, right? How many of us always had the little Ark to color, the little elephants and little giraffes on it, little zebras going on 2 by 2? That's how I remember Noah's Ark from Sunday school. So from the Sunday school perspective on the story of Noah, we were told that after Cain killed his brother, things started to escalate and man became more and more wicked, right? That's when we were coloring these pictures with our crayons and stuff, where we saw the little felt board things. This is what we're getting, right? So let's proceed. So according to our felt board stories and our coloring crayon pictures of Noah, God became fed up with the wickedness of man, told Noah to build an ark, place animals in it, endure the flood rains, and then one day the storms will end. And then God keeps his promises and reminds Noah with a pretty rainbow. Did I just kind of paraphrase Sunday school in the Cliff Notes? So what else do we learn from Sunday school? Noah and his family good, all other people bad, right? That's my Cliff Notes version of Sunday school. So we go into Genesis 6 and the story of Noah. Let's see what we got here now. But again, the Sunday school version is the account of Genesis chapter 6 from Genesis 6:9 on. I call those the Sunday school appropriate verses. What about Genesis chapter 6 verses 1 through 8? We don't cover those in Sunday school, right? The verses where the angels broke from their dominion in heaven and come to earth to sin against God with sexual depravity and with human women. This is the inappropriate Sunday school verses, right? Chapter 6 verses 1 through 8. So the account of Nephilim in Genesis 6, 1 through 8. A dilemma exists today in Western seminary where the supernatural is being explained away or avoided altogether in the Bible. The account of the Nephilim is a classic example of the purging of the supernatural out of the Bible. The content of Genesis in verses 1 through 8, chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, clearly illustrates a supernatural cosmic event that triggered a response from God Most High, a flood that will wipe out all living things on the earth and launch Noah and the ark. All right, so is this Bible study version, adult Bible study, my concise here, right? Okay, let's dig deeper. So the context of Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, must be read with the emphasis on the supernatural to fully be understood. So Second Temple Jews clearly understood these verses were about divine spiritual beings, which we loosely refer to as angels in the contemporary church. And I've covered this too in a couple of my other things, Tales of Glory as well. I'm saying we're starting to complement back and forth here. So these Second Temple Jews would have included Jesus and the apostles, They all believed and cited in their New Testament writings about this event involving divine spiritual beings who lusted after human women and mated with them. So have you guys heard about this one before? Right? Let's dive in deeper then. What's going on here? The common belief is the intertestamental period was that Genesis 6 was about divine spiritual beings who sinned and took for themselves earthly wives. So intertestamental period, right? So for Micah was the last book in the Old Testament. We had about 450 years, right? We know from our seminary training that God didn't have any prophetic ministry or talking to us through that 450 years about. And then we start up with the book of Matthew. That is the intertestamental period. And so during that time, the common belief that Genesis 6 was about divine spiritual beings who sinned and took for themselves earthly wives. This was the oral tradition. And at the age of the account of the book of Genesis, this had to be believed farther back to about the time the book was written, right? So it dates far back. It could be some ancient material. But it was always assumed that whoever read Genesis 6, they understood there was this cosmic event that occurred where divine spiritual beings broke from their habitation and had sex with earthly women. It's just insinuated here. So if you were in the times of the Old Testament or intertestamental periods, when you read Genesis 6, you go, oh, that's about those divine spiritual beings who got in trouble, right? That was a common belief. That's how we set up Genesis 6. So a little feedback here. So Josephus, the historian, in his book, The Antiquities of the Jews, Book 1, Chapter 3, writes, "But for what degree of zeal had formerly shown for virtue, they now showed for their actions a double degree of wickedness, whereby they made their God their enemy, for many angels of God accompanied with women, and begot sons that proved unjust, and despisers of all that was good, in account of confidence of their own strength. For the tradition is that these men did what resembled the acts of those whom the Grecians called Titans, giants." Okay? Let that one sink in. This was written, when was Josephus? Probably early 1st century, about. So was it a little after Matthew, the book of Matthew was written? I think Matthew was written around 40 AD, something like that. 30 or 40 AD, maybe earlier. So this is contemporary notes from a Jewish perspective from the Jewish historian Josephus. He talks about the angels broke from their ranks, and that was the common belief at that time. Even Josephus records it. What is interesting here to keep in mind as we move forward, that these men did what resembled the acts of those whom the Grecians called giants, aka Titans. This will come in play here in a second. Put in the back of your mind. Keep in mind, too, if you're correlating stuff here and you're new to this, that Goliath was a giant, right? Goliath had some brothers. We see this when David takes out Goliath, and then later on in David's mighty men takes out a couple of David's, this could be a couple of Goliath's brothers, not David, and they were abominations as well. So with this primer in mind, for Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, let's look at this supernatural event being recorded here. So Genesis 6, verse 1. "When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose." Let's look at verse 2 again. The sons of God. Keep that in the back of your mind a second. That's important nomenclature. Saw that the daughters of man were attractive. There's some dichotomy here between the sons of God and the daughters of man. Genesis 6, verse 3. Verse 3, "Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His day shall be 120 years. Verse 4, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." This might be the line where Josephus is talking about the Grecian Titans, right? The giants. So can you see the parallelism in what Jewish historian Josephus is recording his account of Genesis 6? He's reporting that this event was initiated by divine spiritual beings who sinned against God and broke from the spiritual dominion. That's how we're setting up verses 1 through 4 right now. Who are the sons of God in Genesis 6, verse 2? The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and he took as their wives as any they choose. Okay, I dived into my old logo software here. I don't know if this is clear or not. So we're looking at the Hebrew. We have sons. I mean, it was Bera. Is it Hebrew? We see in this slide here. So if you're looking at the YouTube, you see the slide. I pulled up on Logos and did a look at the translation of verse 2 of the sons of God. And God, we have Elohim, right? So I think it's Bera Elohim. I'm not looking at the slides. I think that's the Hebrew. Bera Elohim was sons of God. And God is capital G. Capital E Elohim. So notes I have from Logos software. Looking up sons of God. Sons of God, Beni Ha Elohim. Angels are members of a heavenly host of beings. We see it in Genesis 6, where we're at. Job 1, verse 6, in chapter 2, verse 1, Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, and we also see it in Job 38, verse 7. So we called that out too last time, I think when we were looking at, actually it was the first episode of the Supernatural Through His Word. We're talking about the Elohim, right? The sons of God. We talked about Job 38, where the sons of God were present when God created the physical universe. So we're talking about divine spiritual beings here, the sons of God, not human men, not the sons of Seth. No, we are talking about, as we look at this, we're taking a scholarly approach, what we would deem as angels, but that's the wrong terminology. What we're deeming as the heavenly host, the holy ones, or divine spiritual beings, okay? So the sons of God in Genesis 6, verse 2 is clearly about divine spiritual beings that broke from their heavenly abode to take for themselves earthly wives. So practicing Jews from Noah through Jesus and the apostles understood this event and recognized it when they read it. It was referred to as the sin of the watchers, or the sin of the holy ones. So the sin of the watchers, the holy ones, is documented in an intertestamental book titled The Book of Enoch 1. So as we talk about this Book of Enoch 1, I want you to keep in mind it's a non-canonical book. That means it's not included in the Bible, right? But it is ancient Hebrew, and it does carry the tradition of what happened in Genesis 6. So it's of interest to us to look at it. It's not something that we go out and read and pull into and value as much like the 66 books in the Bible, because there's parts of the thing of Enoch 1 are kind of wonky. What scholars believe is the Book of Enoch 1 preserves the oral tradition of what happened in Genesis 6, and that's why it's of interest to us. So the Book of Enoch 1 existed during the time of the Septuagint, but was not recognized as significant to be included as a canonical. Therefore, Enoch 1 is not included in the 66 books of the Bible, all right? We know that. I know a lot of charismatics, when they discovered it should be in the Bible. No, it's not the 67th book to belong in the Bible. It's commented as Apocrypha or something, some contemporary writing that existed that explains stuff but doesn't quite fit. So Enoch 1 is about the accounts of Enoch from Genesis 5. Remember we talked about him during our whole genealogy in episode 2. The supernatural through his word. So from Genesis 5, Enoch was in heaven observing and mediating for the sinful watchers. Okay, remember Enoch was taken up and he was no more. He was pulled up into heaven. That's the Enoch we're talking about, the Enoch from Genesis 5. I can't remember if Enoch was, don't quote me on this one, was he the great-grandfather or grandfather of Noah? Lamech was the father of Noah. So I can't remember if I'll have to go, but we'll go back, look later, but don't want to pontificate. So we had Enoch, Lamech, and I think Noah. I think that was the order, but we'll go look later. It's just, I'll send it to you guys for homework. Look it up. Also too, on the show notes on episode 2 of Genesis 5, I managed to find a timeline of these men and where they were born, how they're separate apart from each other. So go ahead and check out m16ministries.blogspot.com and go to the Supernatural in His Word and check out episode 2, because there I posted the graph that shows the how these guys were born and how they fall together in genealogy and history on the timeline, but based on years apart. So our friend Enoch, who was no more, he didn't die, God took him. His account of the story, he's in heaven observing and mediating for the sinful watchers who got in trouble. Okay, since he's up there, they want him to go back and forth with God and mediate. So let's look at what's going on. The sins of the watchers is in Enoch 1, chapter 6. So I'll read from this. Enoch 1, chapter 6, 1. And it came to pass, when the sons of men had increased, that in those days there were born to them fair and beautiful daughters. And the angels, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, Come, let us choose for ourselves wives from the children of men, and let us beget for ourselves children. Kind of matches up with, verse 2? The sons of God desired the daughters of men. Do you see it right there? So they're giving an account in the book of Enoch what they believe the oral tradition was. I'm just going to try to help align you guys that this is what this is, and that's what the Second Temple Jews believed. And that's how we have to align our supernatural thinking right now. That some cosmic event occurred that required God's action. Verse 3 from Enoch 1, chapter 6. Samaziah, who was their leader, said to them, I fear that you may not wish this deed to be done, and that I alone will pay for this great sin. And then they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath and bind one another with curses. So not to alter this plan, but to carry this out plan effectively. Then they all swore together and all bound one another with curses to it. And they were in all 200, and they came down on Ardis, which is the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called the mountain Hermon because on it they swore and bound one another with curses. And so chapter 6, verse 7 and verse 8 give an account of the leaders of the angels that did this. So it's I'm not going to read them, but there's a ton of little angels listed in it, and their account was that the leaders of the 200 angels and all of the others with them. So there was 200 angels that broke away and did this, according to the oral tradition of Second Temple Jews and before that. Okay, that's how we're setting up Genesis verse 6. This is the pre-story we need to understand Genesis 6. The sin of the watchers. Book of Enoch 1, chapter 7. Here it is. And they took for themselves, and everyone chose for himself one each, and they began to go into them, and they were promiscuous with them. And they taught them charms and spells, and they showed them the cutting of roots and trees. And they became pregnant and bore large giants, and their height was 3,000 cubits. These devoured all the toil of men until men were unable to sustain them. And the giants turned against them in order to devour men. So they became cannibalistic here, huh? First they ate all our food, and then there was no food left, so they started devouring the men, became cannibalistic. Chapter 7, verse 5. And they began to sin against birds, and against animals, and against reptiles, and against fish, and they devoured one another's flesh, and drank blood from it. Then the earth complained about the lawless ones. So let's recap what happened here. So the watchers, the holy ones, defiled God's human race with sexual depravity, seduction. They introduced witchcraft, sorcery, and lawlessness, and humanity became wicked and evil. This was the backstory that was part of the theology of the Second Temple Jews. The apostles were aware of the account of the watchers in Genesis 6. It was part of their oral tradition and recorded in intertestamental and non-canonical book of Enoch 1. There is an Enoch 2 that exists, but it was written like several hundred years after the time of Jesus, so we'll kind of be careful with that one. That's something that's, even Enoch 1 we got to be careful of. The only thing we're really interested in Enoch 1, it may give us the backstory to Genesis 6. And that was what the Second Temple Jews believed, that it did give us the backstory of what was going on. That they clearly understood and go, oh yeah, okay, the Nephilim, the Watchers, right? The Watchers came down and created Nephilim. The giants. That's what they came to mind right away. And it doesn't now. Like we just got so deep in our own pontifications, we just went sideways and rewrote out the supernatural. God is supernatural. He has supernatural beings. We're supernatural beings. We're spiritual beings encased in flesh, right? So we're supernatural too. So Genesis 6, verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he made man out of the earth, and he grieved him to his heart. Okay, so the depravity ran wild and just made man wicked. And that's where the wickedness comes from. We align with the story of Noah. There's continuity here. It doesn't seem like there's continuity. It's like, wow, there's giants, and boom, Noah's going to flood the earth, or God's going to flood the earth and put Noah in his ark. So there's that threshold of this continuity. It seems like it's in Genesis 6 until you see this piece together. Where did the wickedness come from? It came from the Watchers and the depravity they placed in mankind's heart. That's where God says here, the man became wicked, okay? So we had the Watchers, right? The Watchers did it. The Watchers chose human women and begot children. And those children were messed up. The offspring of the Watchers and the human women was messed up. They were violent, evil, wicked creatures. So chapter 6, verse 7 of Genesis. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I created from the face of the land, man and his animals, creeping things, and birds of the heavens. For I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So let's do a recap here of Genesis 6, verses 1 through 8, because that's what preludes the Noah story starting in Genesis 6, verse 9. So here we go, recap. The Watchers, the holy ones, are what we miscommonly call as angels now, broke from their dominion and mated with human women. This act was an abomination to creation. The Watchers spread depravity across the human race, except for the righteous man Noah and his family. All humanity, aside from Noah and his family, were wicked, right? They were tainted by this wickedness. They were defiled. The defilement spread to animals as well, and God decided to wipe out all life on earth with flood and spare Noah and his family. Okay, so there's some weird, twisted genetic experiments going on here with the Nephilim, right? They were doing crazy, wicked stuff, and it included animals. So we need to correlate where the story of Enoch and the Watchers appears again in the Bible, because we have to have anchor points. We have to have data points in the Bible to say, hey, this was somewhat valid. Okay, this is going on. So where do we find these anchor points, these data points? It's actually throughout the Bible once you start seeing it. But the key ones to highlight are 1 Peter 3, where Jesus proclaimed to the spirits in prison. 2 Peter 2, the Watchers who sinned in chains are in prison now, right? And that's the same prisoners that Jesus went to proclaim to the spirits in prison. And we see it in Jude 5 through 7, the Watchers in prison for sexual morality. That ties back to 2 Peter 2. We see in 1 Corinthians 11, women cover their heads so not to entice angels. Did you ever wonder what that was about? This, I kind of didn't really want to pull the book of Enoch into context yet, because I was waiting for Paul to say something, right? Okay, there's 2 Peter and there's Jude. Okay, it's close. They nailed some of this stuff. But when Paul started talking about the sins of the Watchers and women had to cover their heads so not to entice angels, Guess what that's from? That's the Watchers. So we have 3 accounts here. Let's go through these, just so we have data points that hop back and forth. So Mike, you're throwing stuff out as heresy. Burn them a stake. Yeah, don't send the people the torches and pitchforks yet. Let's go through this thing. It's interesting. There's a lot of stuff that put me on the fence of the Book of Enoch here, and it's I'm not 100% accepting it yet, but the data points that we're finding here tell us that yes, the apostles were aware of the Book of Enoch, and they did cite it. So here we go. Let's dive in. So 1 Peter 3:18 through 22, Jesus proclaimed to the spirits in prison. So let's look at this. 1 Peter 3, verse 18. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, and that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, made alive again in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. Who are the spirits in prison? Where do we see this? We don't. We don't see it, but we do see it later on Enoch, that the Watchers that were appealing to Enoch from Genesis 5 were put in prison in an abyss, right? And we see this, and it's like, where do we ever see accounts of this? We don't. We only see it in Peter and Jude. So let's move on here. But when Jesus went to proclaim to the spirits in prison, he's going, hey, I fulfilled and drank my Father's cup, and I died, and I was resurrected, right? I'm in the process of being resurrected. So I'm telling you guys right now, my process of resurrection is the mystery that Paul spoke about, and well, he hasn't broke about yet, right? He will. But this is the mystery that they didn't understand. And he undid what the Watchers did, the wickedness, right? It was part of Jesus' resurrection. We never hear that in the church, right? We never hear it in the pulpit, that part of this. But there it is right there. It's right there in 1 Peter 3, verse 19. So let's move on. Verse 20. 1 Peter 3, verse 20. Because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Baptism, which corresponds to this now, saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal for God, for God's conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So interesting. So, verse 19, Jesus goes down and preaches to the spirits in prison, right? The Watchers, the wicked angels. And because they formerly did not obey God, this is why. When God's patient waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. And now in 21 it talks about baptism. Here's the continuity here. So when we start, is it Genesis 6 verse 9, we start talking about Noah and building the ark. It's spiritual warfare here, right? This is what's going on. God's going to wipe out this wickedness that was brought in by these evil angels. And he's going to pass us through the water. We're going to see that again in Exodus too. God's going to pass his people through the water. And Peter calls it baptism, which corresponds to this now, saves you not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience. A righteous man proclaims the baptism through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Very interesting. That's cool. So we're also looking at Noah's Ark as a baptism when everybody gets in the ark. We're not there yet, but that's interesting that we see the continuity tied together here in 1 Peter 3. God proclaims to the angels, and he tells them, when I did the flood, it was a baptism, right? He's delivering an act of spiritual warfare. He's delivering the 8 persons in the ark. Very cool stuff here. More stuff we didn't learn in Sunday school, right? Or we didn't learn at the pulpit. Forget Sunday school. I mean, Sunday school is great and all, but we didn't learn at the pulpit. So 1 Peter 3, verse 22, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him. Okay, that's something else we'll get to here too as we move along down the road. There's some things going on that God's fixing. A lot of stuff's going to happen in Genesis. When we hit Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, we're looking at this stuff here too, and it's also tied into Ephesians 6:10 through 12. And we'll talk about that when we get there, but start keeping an eye on Jesus undid a lot of things that wicked angels did in Genesis. And we're unpacking it here. In Genesis, a lot of spiritual warfare is going on that we were never heard from the pulpit, right? Just like, this is a fairy tale, this is mythology. It's not mythology, it's God's supernatural and doing stuff the evil angels did after the fall in Genesis 3. And God's cleaning a lot of stuff up. Jesus had to clean a lot of stuff up. And this is one of them here too. So here we are. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 6. The watchers who sinned in chains in prison. So here we go. 2 Peter 2, verse 4. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. If he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. It's all tied together, right? It's coupled together again. God punished the evil angels and put them to hell, right? There's no judgment on the angels we know about yet, right? Satan and his evil angels. We know it's coming. What was this judgment about? This judgment was about those 200 angels. We think they're 200. That's oral tradition, right? We think there was 200 angels. They're put in chains. And of course, he ties it back to Noah, right? And when he cleared the wickedness, he ties it back to Noah. So Noah and his 7 family members were brought through the flood, the baptism, right? Keep that together. That's what Peter told us earlier. 2 Peter 2, verse 6. If by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, they condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going on to happen to the ungodly. Like ding, 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 ding. Remember I told you Genesis 6, a lot of spiritual warfare is going on that Jesus is cleaning up with now. Our other interesting data point occurs in Jude 5 through 7. The watchers in prison for sexual immorality, right? It's continuity with what we just saw within 2 Peter. So Jude 5. Now I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Right? So he has people locked up in the abyss, not people, he has angels, divine spiritual beings for sexual immorality and depravity and bringing wickedness to mankind. And they're locked up and they're awaiting judgment. So verse 7 of Jude. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. There it is right there. So what happened in Genesis 1 through 4? The holy ones, the watchers, decided to sin. Not all of them, just a selection of them. Because we see watchers again in the book of Daniel who didn't sin, right? So the holy ones, there were some holy ones who decided to take on, they lusted after human wives. They took them and had sexual depravity with them. And it says they went into them and they produced children. They produced abominations is what they produced. So that's what's happening in Genesis 1 through 4. And as we see later, as it transpires through, they created giants and mighty men. They created titans. So who are the angels in chains that Peter and the author of Jude are alluding to? The epistle authors are referring to their common knowledge of Enoch, chapters 10 through 11. So first Enoch, chapter 10, verse 11. And Michael, he said, go to Michael, bind Shezemah and the others with him who have mated with the daughters of men, so that they are be defiled by men of their uncleanliness. And when their sons perish, and they see the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them for 70 generations in the valley of the earth. Where's that? It's the abyss. It's the darkness. It's death, right? Sheol. Until the day of their judgment and consummation, until everlasting judgment is consummated. They'll be led to the fiery abyss and to the torture and to the prison. They'll be confined forever. Okay, what's this sound like? It sounds like what Peter was talking about. It sounds like what Jude was talking about. There it is, right? There's the prison, and those angels are being confined, the angels in chains. So this is the oral tradition we're going through here. So we're going through a transition now. So we have Genesis 6, we have Enoch and the Nephilim, And now we're doing a slight transition at Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, transitions from the account of the sin of the watchers and the Nephilim to the account of Noah and the flood. So again, the author of Genesis is continuing with the account of why the flood happened. So verses 1 through 8 of Genesis 6 are why the flood had to take place. A decision for God the Most High to flood the earth is given in Enoch 1, chapter 10. Consider Genesis 6, 9, the segue into the account of Noah and the ark. Okay, now we see it's flowing now, right? Because, when I read this stuff too, it's like, what on earth's this got to do with the flood? This is like oh, by the way, okay, let's talk, like it was in continuity storytelling, right? It was not flowing. But now that you see it pulled out, there was a backstory that we didn't know about Genesis 6 that we were taught about in Sunday at the pulpit, right? There it is. This is what the Second Temple Jews clearly understood was the backstory to Genesis 6. And so either it was documented somewhere else and we haven't found the Hebrew scrolls yet on this, or, it just didn't appear in the Septuagint either, which was the Bible at the time before the gospel, right? And the epistles, it was Septuagint. And First Enoch was not in that either, but there were other books that existed outside the Bible or non-canonical, like Tobit and these other apocryphal books that are kind of funky and weird. And what do we do with them? Maccabees, those things. It's all sorts of stuff. They exist. It's just, once you get a clear understanding of the Bible, it's okay to go read them, but don't go off the reservation going, oh, this ties in this ties in this. It kind of gives us backstories that just nod our head and move on, right? As we do more research. But this helps make things slightly more clear of what the readers of that time, the Septuagint and beforehand, what was going on in Genesis 6, because none of this makes sense to us, especially to us now in the modern day, right? Especially when the Bible is no longer supernatural and we've come up with this crazy story about the sons of Seth, married some, inappropriate women. No. Nope, that's not what it is. Crazy stuff here, right? Okay, so we're not saying the people, the torches and pitchforks in Mike's house, right? This is not heresy. This is what our apostles were quoting in their gospels and their epistles. They're quoting it. This book existed. So, yep, interesting stuff. So Enoch chapter 10, verse 1. And then the Most High, the great and holy one, spoke and sent Arsilisar to the son of Lamech, which is Noah, right? Remember the son of Lamech's Noah, and said to him, say to him in my name, hide yourself and reveal to him the end, which is coming, because the whole earth will be destroyed. A deluge is about to come on all the earth, and all that is in it will be destroyed. And now teach him so he may escape, and his offspring may survive the whole earth. And further the Lord said to Raphael, bind Azazel by his hands and his feet, and throw him into the darkness, and split open the desert, which is Dubal, and throw him there. And throw on him jagged and sharp stones, and cover him with darkness, and let him stay there forever, and cover his face, so that he may not see the light. So Second Temple Jews clearly understood that Genesis 6 was all about spiritual warfare, right? That's what's going on here. It's spiritual warfare. A cosmic event occurred where the wicked divine spiritual beings called the Watchers broke out of their heavenly domain and carried out sexual depravity and immorality with the daughters of men. The Watchers also released more forbidden information beyond the scope of what happened in Genesis 3. Sorcery and witchcraft. That's what the Watchers brought to the earthly women. God reached out to his righteous soul, Noah, and asked him to comply to God's plan to eradicate the wickedness of the Watchers and their abomination offspring from the face of the earth. God has a plan to deliver Noah and his family, his righteous ones. So now we're transitioning into Genesis 6, verses 9 through 22. It's the account of Noah building the ark. Okay, you see how this transition now? Now God wants to wipe out the earth. Now we tend towards a story of what happened with Noah. What's his story? So verse 9 of chapter 6, Genesis. These are the generation of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. Why? Because of the depravity of the watchers and their offsprings, the Nephilim. Verse 12. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. Verse 13. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you're to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth, 50 cubits, its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark, and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with the lower, second, and third decks. Verse 17, for behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. Verse 18, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. So again, this is about spiritual warfare. Jesus' deliverance of Noah and his family. God said he's going to make a covenant with Noah. But with thee, I will establish my covenant. Looking back at my Logos software here, we pulled up and had a look at it. A special promise of deliverance called a covenant to convince him of the confidence to repose in it. The substance and terms of this covenant are related to Genesis 6, 19 through 21. What's a covenant? It's a proclamation of what side you're on in a spiritual warfare. That's what it is here. So when he made a covenant with God, he's going, yes, I'm on your side. Let's do this. I know what you're saying. We're going to do it. And so it was a promise. It was a covenant made with God. So it was a pact. So God's going to save his righteous 8 human beings right here under that covenant. Let's follow the data points. The author of Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7. We see free will and spiritual warfare, which is important. God didn't twist Noah's arm, right? He gave to under free will. Hey, I need you to do this. And under free will, Noah complied. As a righteous man, he complied and made the covenant. So Hebrews 11, verse 7, by faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this, he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. Right? That was the covenant. I know what you're going to do, God, and I'll do it. God's going to flood the earth. The world's going to be condemned. These flows making sense now? Ding, 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 how we're going here. In Genesis 6. Genesis 6 and Hebrews 11:7. Free will and spiritual warfare. Jesus gave Noah and his family the option to choose a side in the spiritual battle. Noah, being a righteous man, chose the side of God. Again, it's a spiritual warfare proclamation. Whose side are you on in this battle? So in Genesis 6:19 through 20, Jesus provides instructions for this deliverance. And of every living thing of all flesh, she'll bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kind, of the animals according to their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind, 2 of every sort shall come in to you to keep them alive. We kind of see like this is coming back to Genesis 1. The birds according to their kind, the animals according to their kind. Remember, man had dominion. So man has dominion again, Noah, the righteous man, to protect the animals and bring them into the ark. Genesis 6, verse 21. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten and stored up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. So Genesis 6, the flood is setting for baptism for God to wash away the sins of the watchers, right? And of man, the depravity of man. Noah made a covenant, a very open proclamation that he chose the side of God. God will deliver Noah and his family through watery baptism of the flood. We've seen these things here. We keep seeing baptism. Did baptism just show up in Matthew or the book of John where hey, you need to be baptized, such and such. Why are we doing this? It was a proclamation. Okay, conclusion. So Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 9 provides a backstory as to why God released the global judgment of the flood. The story of the sin of the Watchers was well known with the Second Temple Jews and probably the Jews before that. A lot before that. Probably back even Moses in the book of Exodus. I think they knew about it. Which is why we get a paraphrasing of it in Genesis 6. We were supposed to already clearly understand that, right? Oh, it's the story of the Watchers. I get this. The apostles and Jesus embraced the worldview of the non-canonical Jewish literature of Enoch 1. They knew about it. They quote it. And as we start moving through Genesis, we're going to start hopping back and forth the data points where Jesus quotes these things, and it's just stuff we gleaned over from the pulpit. Sometimes our commentaries don't comment on this and link us back and forth. But it's important to keep the Old Testament intact as we start moving in. We're going to do this because a lot of interesting spiritual warfare stories that just carry some of them go all the way to Revelation. It's just some incredible cool stuff. So let's push on here. This is what we need to keep in mind, though, the backstory. What happened with Genesis? What became of the abomination offspring of the Watchers of Nephilim? Second Temple Jews believe that these are the evil spirits, aka demons, we see Jesus encounter in the Gospels. Because these are unclean spirits of the Watchers. They are bound to earth. Now, this is something we're not fully taught either, and I think we picked up on the tradition of the Catholic Church where the demons were some of the fallen angels. And I'm kind of on the fence in this. What is it? What's curious here is, why do we have some demons on earth, and why do we have high-level satanic spiritual beings in the second heavens who don't come down, right? Why is there this dichotomy between the two? And it's kind of perplexed me too. How come just the demons got cast down to earth? And we look at this thing, it's the sin of the Watchers explains that the demons were earthbound because they weren't spiritual heavenly beings. Okay, so on earth, so it's kind of like their domain, right? It's a flip domain. Mankind has dominion over the earth, but the unclean spirits have this weird imprisonment on the earth because they weren't God-ordained spiritual beings. That makes sense? It was a abomination, a bastardization, if you will, of spirits. They're unclean spirits. That's why they're unclean. They're bastard sons, right? They're not actual spirits. They're mean, they're angry, they're cannibalistic, and it kind of explains their nastiness. And if you look too, I want to carry the continuity here. Here, if we go through Genesis, we're going to start encountering some giants and some giant kings in the book of Genesis further down, like King of Og and the King of Bashan. Bashan happened around, it was a region around what was believed to be around Mount Hermon, I believe. Not close, but in that region. And the names kind of changed. And if we start seeing the Jesus, when I think it was in Matthew, the Gethsemane demoniac, the one that was in chains in the cemetery, had legion. Those demons were in the area of the old, what was referred to as Bashan area, which makes it interesting. So Jesus comes back, and when he shows his authority over these demons, that they're the unclean spirits, and that's part of the thing that he shows, that he is the Christ, he is the Messiah. And that was one of the parallel things the Second Temple Jews were looking for, that the Messiah, the Christ, was coming back to also undo the sin of the Watchers after the flood. And so, remember, these demons were going, it's not our time yet, why have you come? And they fully recognized who the Messiah was and that he had authority over them. It's demonic. So that's kind of, I think, why. I'm leaning on the fence here. We'll never know for sure, right? This stuff is, it's just hard. We have to talk to Jesus about this, a lot of prayers, but I'm on the fence about it. But it does make sense why low-level demons exist, and they are the bastard abomination spirits of the Nephilim. That's what demons are. And that was their belief back then, man. So it's interesting, right? There's always research going on here. Like I said, I'm involved in spiritual warfare and exorcism. I'm never going to ask the demon, "Are you a Nephilim? I command you in the authority of Jesus." You know, somebody will do that. I could care less. All I need to know is I have authority over the demons. So don't get worried about this. We know we have authorities over them. Nobody knows the origin of them, where they came from. We won't find out until we get to the, I don't know, might be the Heaven 101 class when we go on to our glory. We'll get all our information there. So be it. We don't have to have all the information. But the more I look at this material, the more I see what the Second Temple Jews believed, I'm leaning more towards this is a possibility, more so than being fallen angels. You know, but just as we do more research, it's just, I'm not going to lean one way or the other, because all I have to know now is that Jesus is the Son of God, died for my sins, and he is the Lord God and Savior, and he has authority of all this stuff. So it really doesn't matter which way we lean. It's not going to hurt us one way or the other, nor do we need to dive one way or the other and go, oh, we got to start learning how to deal with the Nephilim. No, it's not. No, don't even go off the deep end. I'm sure there's people out there already that are doing deliverance stuff like, well, we specialize in Nephilim spirits, like whatever, you know. But just keep this in mind, is what I'm trying to do. Don't go off the deep end with this material. Keep this in mind. It existed, and when you start seeing the Nephilim, you start seeing this stuff, oh, that's what this was. And this won't be the last time we see the Nephilim. We're going to see them some more. We're going to see them some more in Genesis, and we're going to see them all the way through. We're going to see them in Joshua. We'll see them in Exodus. We'll see them all the way through, I think, to 2 Samuel, where David's mighty men finally wipes them out. Okay? So they'll be around for a while. This is the backstory to them. So that wraps it up for here. Next time, we cover Genesis 7 and the voyage of the ark. There's rain in that spiritual forecast, guys. Here it comes. There's going to be rain. Just want to warn you ahead of time. So I hope this stuff makes sense. It's fascinating, right? I don't know why we don't get this off the pulpit. You know, we take our time to make all these little funky, fancy PowerPoints and stuff, but I don't know why this wasn't. A lot of good books out there right now. I would start listening to the Naked Bible podcast too. If you're learning the Bible, stick with this right now. Don't go overboard and overwhelm yourself. Stick with this. I'm going to keep it easy right now. That's all you need to know the background on what's happening. But if you've been, a Christian for some time, you're pretty solid in it. You're off your baby's milk on this stuff, and you're ready to learn more and start expanding your knowledge of stuff. Go ahead and listen to Naked Bible podcast. Some good stuff there. Dr. Michael Heiser, his book Reversing Hermon, talks a lot about the book of Enoch and what happened here. He has a lot of good material. I recommend him. He's a scholar in ancient languages. I don't think it's just Hebrew. I think he's like Ugrit, Egyptology, but he has a ton of stuff. He's an amazing man to listen to. But I get a lot of my research from there too, and just all over the internet. I like to listen to rabbis too tell this story, because they tell us some stuff that's similar. And it's cool stuff. They'll read it from the Hebrew and translate it. It's kind of cool. So find some stuff on YouTube. I'll probably put some stuff on my show notes too that show this. But this is where we're going. There's a lot of continuity here. And like I said, this particular show is on m16ministries.blogspot.com if you want to see where it's hosted. And you'll see the supernatural through his word. We start putting back in through peer-reviewed material of what scholars think happened, some of the best of the best. And that's what we're doing here. We're not, doing this stuff. I've seen preachers now catch onto this stuff and not knowing the full background, not researching the Hebrew, not researching the books and what scholars are saying, just jump out and saying, well, the true story is demons are from the Nephilim. It's a possibly true, but you can't preach it that way because we don't know 100%. So it can be dangerous there as well too, but just keep in mind, as a researcher stuff, it does make sense that that's what low-level demonic unclean spirits are. They're the bastard abominations of the Nephilim. So I hope you like the show. Next time again, we're moving on to Genesis 7 and the voyage of the ark. Until then, I love you guys. You guys are amazing. You have questions, go ahead and you can find me on M16 Ministries Facebook page. You can also come over to a Field Guide to Spiritual Warfare Facebook page, or a Field Guide to Spiritual Warfare.blogspot.com, where I host Tales of Glory podcast. You're going to find out a lot of these stuff intermixes and intertwines between the stuff I'm teaching on Tales of Glory about spiritual warfare. This is kind of my conduit to build up a foundation, especially for those who've been injured, who've been fractured, those who came out of mind control and twisted scriptures. I'm going to try to present the true stuff here of who Jesus is. He's loving God, how he loves people. And people may be hung up to now, like if you're DID and you're going, wow, why was God flooding the earth? He's being mean. Well, you could see based on some of your experiences, especially the ritual abuse guys, how these angels broke down and contaminated the earth and defiled it. And so they were no longer human beings. They were something else. So God wanted to protect mankind. He loved Noah. He loved the righteous man. He showed him what to do, and he helped him, and he delivered him, and he passed him through the water of baptism there. And Jesus delivered him. Very important stuff to consider. So if some of the stuff triggers you, just slow down, and just pray about it, look over the scripture, and whoever's upset about it, ask them why you're upset about this. How is the scripture used for mind control, or how is the scripture used to control me, and why does it sound negative? Now go back through here, kind of like we presented. God was doing some house cleaning, and God even put the angels that did this in chains. He did something about it because he didn't like stuff happening to his family, his people. He loves his people, so he came out. He broke out and did something about it. And even Jesus addressed them when he went down into Hades and Sheol. He went down and found those spirits. Hey, look, I just undid what you guys did, millennia ago, and you guys are gonna face judgment. You probably can let them know too that they're gonna be facing their judgment too when the day of the Lord comes, right? Those evil spirits. So anyhow, you guys are amazing. Love you guys. And until next time, signing off, and God bless.
Thousands and thousands, YESHUA.